Thank you, Madam Speaker. I call Ian McKelvie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to support the Gore District Council Otama Rural Water Supply Bill, and I'm a bit intrigued by this because these water supplies have quite a history in rural New Zealand, and quite a contentious history in many parts of rural New Zealand as well. And I thought it was just worth going back in history a little bit, because many of them came into being in the 60s, 70s and early 80s. Well, basically all by the 80s they were done. But they were brought into being by a government subsidy, interestingly, in a lot of cases, or a government contribution to basically rural water schemes, which were then sponsored by the council, because the council was the community-based body that was most appropriate to do it. In those days, most of them were county councils, and most of them were pretty small, actually. And so they were sponsored by them, but they were then put together local community committees which ran them. So they weren't effectively council-owned entities or council-sponsored entities, and they were put together and they ran pretty well. And often, dare I say it, private entities like these little community committees are much better at maintaining assets than councils ever will be, and that's what caused a lot of the contention with them. Along came the 1989 local government reforms, and council CEOs, with their newfound power, decided that these were community assets, and they took them all over, like they took over thousands of recreational areas, parks, reserves, and things that had belonged to little communities felt belonged to them. These water supplies were among those, and in the Rangitikei there are a large number of these water supplies, very similar to this one, with I guess somewhere between 50 and 300 or 400. In fact, the biggest one, I think, in the Manawatu probably has about, may have upwards of 1,000 connections now. Along came the local government reforms, and they effectively took them off the communities, and they were run as council entities, with some input from the users. That, of course, created quite a deal of controversy, because farmers and rural people have a way of thinking that they're much better at doing stuff than councils are. They still think that. And so there was a lot of contention around the maintenance of them, the cost of maintenance of them, and the way they were run. So that's how we got to where we've got to now. There was quite actually, as well as a council, often a ratepayer subsidy or a council loan, there was also quite a significant capital contribution by the people who connected up to it. Those who didn't connect up to it, interestingly, were left out. And so you'll see in some rural communities there are people who never hooked up, wish they had now, of course. And that's a critical factor too. So that's a bit of the history of these schemes. And so I think it's absolutely appropriate that they come, that this scheme, and many others would like to do the same thing, I'm sure, in the form of a local bill, come back through Parliament and get to maintain themselves. And I don't think that's any necessary criticism of councils or a criticism of the way they're run. But in fact, the only beneficiaries of these schemes are the people who extract the water from them. So it's pretty I think, good that they get to be run, maintained and paid for by those people who benefit from them. They were, of course, started off basically as stock water schemes, and in those days stock water and drinking water were much the same. There'll be many of us, well, there might not be many of us in this house who have drunk out of a water trough, but I certainly have. There were other things kept in water troughs too, yeah, Barbara, exactly. So we don't find anything wrong with drinking out of the water trough and sharing with the sheep. But nowadays things are a little different, and of course the other thing that's changed the way our water supplies are is the fact that we have so many tourists in New Zealand, and so many people move through our rural communities that are not used to the same things that we were used to as young people and whatever. And so it's much more important that we have security of water supplies, so that these schemes are going to have to pay a lot more attention to this type of thing and the renewal and maintenance of them, and to ensure that they're safe. And I think one or two other interesting things, and I noticed that Mark Patterson mentioned an old bloke called Huey Chittick, and whilst I can't claim to be in the same age group as him, because I did meet his brother, his older brother, interestingly, in Gore the other day, and he was quite a significantly bit older than me, like another generation removed, and that's the generation of people that put these things in place, and they're great credit to them. So I think this is a really good bill. I'm sure it will get through the House with complete agreement, because at the end of the day it benefits that small community of people that use this facility. So I say all power to them, and well done to those people who put the bill together, and I'm sure it will be successful. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Speaker. I call Dr Liz Craig.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an absolute privilege